The night was cold, the snow was heavy, and the town was silent. Most people were asleep, hiding under warm blankets far away from the storm, but one man, Daniel, was still awake, sitting alone in his small house on the edge of the street. He heard a strange sound outside, a soft knock followed by a whisper that almost faded in the wind. Daniel stood up slowly, unsure if he had imagined it. The storm was loud, but the knock came again, this time harder. He moved to the door, heart beating faster, and opened it just a little. What he saw froze him more than the snow ever could. Two young women were kneeling in the snow. Their hair was long, red like fire against the white ground. Their skin was pale, almost glowing under the streetlight. Their eyes looked too bright, too sharp, like they were not made for this world. They were shaking, their clothes too thin for the storm, their arms wrapped around each other, whispering words he could not understand. Then one of them looked up at him with desperate eyes. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "We'll be good girls. We'll work. We'll cook. We'll bond. Just let us in." Daniel's hand gripped the door tight. Something in his mind told him this was wrong. They looked human, but there was a strangeness about them, the way their tattoos moved faintly under their skin, glowing like tiny rivers of light, the way the snow around them seemed to melt a little too fast. He should have closed the door, he should have walked away, but their eyes begged him not to. The second sister leaned closer, her voice soft and trembling. "Please, we cannot stay outside. We will freeze. We will serve. We will belong." Daniel's breath made a cloud in the air as he hesitated. His heart told him they were in danger, but his mind whispered something else. Danger might be standing right at his door. Still, he stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in," he said quietly. The sisters moved quickly, almost too quickly. They stepped inside, their bare feet leaving no wet marks on the wooden floor. Daniel noticed but said nothing. He closed the door, shutting out the storm, but bringing in something much colder. The warmth of the house made them sigh. They touched the walls gently, as if they were new to such things. One of them smiled faintly, her lips blue from the cold. The other looked around with wide eyes, curious but also afraid. Daniel gave them blankets, old ones from the closet. They wrapped themselves tightly, but he saw their skin still glowing faintly under the fabric. He wanted to ask questions, who they were, where they came from, why they spoke like that, but something stopped him. A heavy weight in his chest, a fear he could not name. Instead, he only asked, "Are you hungry?" The sisters looked at each other, then back at him. They nodded slowly, but not in the way hungry people usually did. It was as if they were agreeing to play a part. Daniel went to the kitchen, warming soup on the stove. While he cooked, he listened. The sisters whispered in low voices, a language soft and sharp, not human. The words slipped like water through cracks, too quick to catch. When he looked back, they were silent, staring at him with eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. He set the bowls down. The sisters sat close together, holding the spoons awkwardly. They tasted the soup but did not eat much. Instead, they smiled at him, as if the act of eating was enough to make him trust them. The storm outside grew stronger, wind pushing against the walls. Daniel sat across the table, his fingers tapping nervously. He tried to see them as lost girls, victims of something unknown, but the voice in his head whispered again, "They are not what they seem." One of the sisters spoke softly, breaking the silence. "You gave us shelter, you gave us warmth, we will give you loyalty." The other added quickly, "We will stay, we will serve, we will bond." The words sounded like a promise, but also like a warning. Daniel forced a small smile, but inside, unease grew. Something had entered his home that night, something that wore the shape of two beautiful young women. But he knew deep down, they were not human, and by letting them in, he had already crossed a line that could never be undone. Morning came slowly, gray light slipping through the curtains of Daniel's house. The storm outside had passed, but inside, the silence was heavy. Daniel woke early, his mind restless from strange dreams he could not remember. He walked into the living room and found the sisters already awake, sitting close together on the floor, whispering in low voices. They stopped the moment he entered, both looking at him with bright eyes. Their hair, still damp from melted snow, shone like fire in the pale light. They smiled faintly, but their smiles seemed practiced, as if they were copying something they had learned but did not feel. "Good morning," Daniel said carefully. Both sisters echoed together. "Good morning," their voices soft, almost musical. But there was something about the way they spoke, like an echo too perfect, too exact. It made the air feel strange. Daniel tried to act normal, offering them food. He made bread and eggs, simple breakfast. The sisters took the plates but only moved the food around, eating almost nothing. Instead, they watched him closely, their eyes following his every move. "You don't eat much," Daniel said, trying to smile. One of them tilted her head, her red hair falling over her shoulder. "We eat differently," she whispered. The other quickly added, "But we will not trouble you. We will work. We will help. We will belong." Daniel nodded slowly, unsure what that meant. He left the table, pretending to clean dishes, but his eyes kept glancing at them. They touched the wooden chairs, the table, the curtains. Every small thing in the house seemed new to them, as if they were children learning a world for the first time. Later, Daniel went outside to check the snow. The air was sharp and cold. He shoveled the path, but his mind stayed inside, thinking of the sisters. When he returned, he stopped at the door, his breath catching. Through the window, he saw them moving around the living room. Their hands brushed the walls, their fingers tracing patterns in the air. For a moment, the lights flickered. Daniel froze, watching. The sisters whispered in their strange language, their voices weaving like a song. Then suddenly, they stopped, sitting back down, perfectly still, as if nothing had happened. Daniel pushed the door open, his boots crunching on the floor. The sisters looked up and smiled again, too quickly, too perfectly. He felt his skin crawl. Something was happening in his house, something beyond him. That night, Daniel could not sleep. He lay awake, listening to every sound. He heard them moving softly, their footsteps light. He thought he heard them speaking again in that strange tongue, but when he sat up, the voices vanished, leaving only silence. The next day, neighbors came by, curious. An old woman passing by saw the sisters through the window and asked Daniel, "Who are those girls? Family?" Daniel hesitated, then forced a smile. "Yes, distant family. They needed a place for a while." The old woman frowned. "Strange time to visit, in the middle of a storm." Daniel laughed nervously. "Yes, strange indeed." But when the woman left, he noticed the sisters standing behind him, silent, listening to every word. As days passed, the sisters worked around the house, just as they promised. They cleaned, they cooked, they fixed small things, but Daniel noticed strange details. The soup pot never truly emptied. The firewood lasted longer than it should. Sometimes, when he entered a room, the air felt charged, like static before a storm. One evening, Daniel decided to test them. He placed a knife on the table and asked, "Do you know how to cook with this?" One sister picked it up, holding it too tightly. Her fingers pressed into the handle until the wood cracked slightly. She looked up at him with a soft smile. "Yes, we know." Daniel's heart skipped. He realized their strength was not normal. That night, he could not stop thinking. Were they dangerous or simply lost? He wanted to believe their promises. "We'll be good girls. We'll belong." But his fear grew stronger each day. Later, while he pretended to sleep, he opened his eyes just a little. The sisters stood near his bed, watching him. Their eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, their hair like shadows of fire. They whispered, their words too soft to understand, but one sentence was clear, carried through the silence of the room. "We must bond, soon." Daniel's breath froze in his chest. He stayed still, his heart racing. They moved away quietly, disappearing into the dark hallway. Daniel knew then, whatever they were, whatever they wanted, it was only the beginning, and his house was no longer his own. It had become a place of secrets. The days passed slowly, but Daniel's unease grew heavier with each sunrise. The sisters were always there, always close, moving around the house like shadows that never left. They worked, they cleaned, they spoke kindly, but behind their bright eyes, something was hidden. Daniel could feel it, like a storm waiting far away, just beyond the hills. One evening he sat near the fire, trying to read. The sisters sat across from him, whispering together in that strange language. The sound was soft, like a song, but also sharp, like glass breaking under water. Daniel pretended not to notice, but his eyes followed their movements. Suddenly, one of them stopped whispering and stared at him. Her voice slipped into English, quiet but clear. "Do you want to know who we are?" Daniel froze, his book slipping from his hand. The second sister touched her arm quickly as if to stop her, but it was too late. Daniel's voice was rough. "Yes, I want to know." The fire cracked between them, sending sparks into the air. For a long moment they said nothing, only looking at each other. Then the first sister spoke again, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "We come from a place that no longer exists," she whispered. Her voice carried both sadness and anger. "Our home was destroyed, burned in a war of our kind, and we were left without a sky, without a future." The second sister looked down, her hands gripping the blanket. "We survived, but survival has a cost." Daniel leaned forward slowly. "What cost?" The sisters were silent, their faces shadowed by the firelight. Finally, the first one said, "We were made to serve, but we were also made to bond. Our kind cannot live long without it." Her words slipped through the air like smoke, heavy and strange. Daniel frowned. Bond? What do you mean? The sisters did not answer directly. Instead, the second one asked softly, Do you feel it? The pull when we look at you, the silence between our words. Her question made Daniel's skin prickle. He turned away, not wanting to admit he did feel something he could not explain. That night, when the sisters had gone to their room, Daniel sat alone, staring at the fire until it died, his thoughts twisted, tangled. They were not normal, that much was clear, but were they dangerous or simply broken by the world they had lost? The next morning, Daniel woke early and went outside. Snow covered the ground, quiet and endless, but when he looked back at his house, he noticed something strange. On the frost of the window, a pattern had formed, circles and lines, glowing faintly like writing not made by human hands. He stepped closer, touching the glass, but the pattern faded the moment his fingers brushed it. Inside, the sisters were awake, watching him through the glass. Their eyes met his, and he felt again that strange pull, like gravity, like a chain he could not see but could feel in his bones. Later that day, Daniel gathered the courage to ask again, Why did you come here? To me? The sisters looked at each other, then the first one answered, Because you opened the door. The second added, Because you chose us. And once the choice is made, it cannot be undone. Daniel's heart sank. What choice? I didn't, but he stopped, realizing the night he let them in was the night everything changed. Maybe he had chosen without knowing. Maybe the door itself had been the test. As days turned to nights, Daniel noticed more signs. The sisters never slept deeply, their eyes always half open. Sometimes he heard them crying in the dark, whispering names he did not know. Other times, he saw them stand perfectly still, staring at the sky as if waiting for something to return. One evening, a storm rolled across the sky, thunder shaking the windows. The sisters stood near the door, watching the flashes of lightning. Daniel approached carefully. What are you looking for? He asked. The first sister whispered, Signals. The second said softly, Enemies. Their words made Daniel's blood run cold. He realized then, they were not simply lost girls searching for shelter. They were survivors of something far larger, something still reaching across the stars. That night, when Daniel lay in bed, he tried to sleep, but his mind kept circling the same thought. If their past had followed them here, how long before it arrived at his door? And in the hallway, unseen by him, the sisters whispered again, We must prepare. We must protect, and when the time comes, we must bond, or we will be nothing. The night was quiet at first, too quiet. Daniel sat by the window, staring into the darkness. Snow covered the street, and the wind pressed softly against the glass. The sisters sat on the floor nearby, whispering in their strange tongue, their eyes fixed on the sky. Something in the air felt wrong. It was heavy, tense, as if the world was holding its breath. Daniel tried to shake it off, but his hands would not stop trembling. He felt the same pull again, that invisible thread tying him to the sisters, pulling tighter than ever. Then he saw it, a light in the sky, sharp and sudden, cutting through the clouds. Not a star, not a plane, but something moving fast and low. The sisters stood instantly, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. They found us, one whispered. Her voice was cold, filled with fear and anger. Daniel jumped to his feet. Who found you? But the sisters gave no answer, only staring at the sky as the light grew brighter. The house trembled as a sound ripped through the air, a low metallic hum that made Daniel's bones ache. The lights in the room flickered, shadows stretched across the walls. Then the front door rattled as if struck by an invisible hand. Daniel grabbed a chair, his heart racing, but one sister pushed him back, her strength shocking. Stay behind us, she said firmly, her glowing tattoos pulsing with light. The second sister stepped forward, her eyes burning like fire. We will fight. The door burst open with a crash, cold air rushing inside. Figures stepped through the storm, tall, thin, and strange. Their bodies shimmered as, if half hidden by light itself, they carried weapons that glowed with sharp blue energy. Daniel stumbled back, his breath short. The sisters moved together, their hands lifting as if guided by something unseen. The air around them shifted, thickened, and then exploded with power. A wave of light burst from their bodies, slamming into the intruders. The attackers staggered but did not fall. Their weapons lit up, firing beams of blue fire across the room. Wood splintered, glass shattered, flames sparked from the walls. Daniel ducked, covering his head, but the sisters stood firm. They moved like dancers, their steps fast and perfect. Every gesture they made carried strange energy. One raised her hand and a wall of light appeared, blocking the blue fire. The other sent a blast of force that threw one attacker into the snow. Daniel stared, unable to breathe. The innocent girls who had begged for shelter now looked like warriors. Their faces were calm but fierce, their glowing eyes filled with power. He realized then they had never been helpless. The intruders shouted in their strange language, regrouping outside the door. One raised a device, and the hum in the air grew louder. The sisters cried out, their bodies shaking as if something was pulling at them. Daniel saw their tattoos burning brighter, almost tearing their skin. "What's happening?" he shouted. "They want to take us," one sister gasped. "They want to end the bond before it begins," the other added, her voice breaking. Daniel's fear turned to anger. He grabbed a heavy piece of wood from the floor and swung it at the nearest figure. It passed through the shimmer of light, hitting solid form beneath. The attacker fell back with a hiss, its weapon slipping from its hand. The sisters looked at him with surprise. For a moment, their glowing eyes softened. "You chose us again," one whispered, before turning back to the fight. Another blast shook the walls, pieces of the roof falling to the ground. Smoke filled the air, the fire spreading. Daniel coughed, struggling to see, but through the smoke he watched the sisters unleash their full strength. Their voices rose together, chanting words not human. The air cracked like thunder, and light poured from their bodies. The intruders screamed as the force struck them, throwing them back into the storm. One by one, they disappeared into the night, their lights fading into the snow. Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of fire. Daniel fell to his knees, gasping for breath. The sisters stood side by side, their bodies shaking, their glowing tattoos dimming slowly. They looked at him with tired but steady eyes. "It has begun," one said softly. "They will come again," the other whispered. Daniel's heart pounded, his home was broken, his life torn apart. And yet, as he looked at the sisters, he felt something stronger than fear. He felt bound to them, not by choice, not by force, but by something deeper, something he could not escape. And somewhere in the shadows of the storm, unseen eyes watched, waiting for the next strike. The fire in Daniel's house had been put out, but the walls were blackened, the windows shattered, and the air still smelled of smoke. Snow blew in through the broken door, leaving the floor wet and cold. Daniel stood among the ruins, his body aching, his mind heavy with questions. The sisters sat close together, their glowing tattoos dim now, their faces pale with exhaustion. For a moment, silence ruled the house. Only the wind spoke, rattling loose boards and carrying ash into the night. Daniel wanted answers, but before he could ask, a sound outside made his blood freeze. Engines, heavy ones, rolling down the snowy street. He stepped to the window and saw them. Dark trucks with government markings, soldiers in heavy coats climbing down, their rifles shining under the streetlights. Red and blue lights cut through the snow, and a voice on a loudspeaker echoed through the night. "Residents of this home, step outside immediately." The sisters stood, their bodies tense. Fear flickered in their eyes, but also defiance. Daniel's chest tightened. He knew this was no rescue. The government had come, and they had come for the sisters. The door burst open with a crash, soldiers pouring in, weapons raised. Daniel lifted his hands, shouting, "Wait! They're not dangerous!" But his voice was drowned in the chaos. Men shouted commands, boots slammed against the broken floor. One soldier grabbed Daniel, forcing him aside. Others aimed rifles at the sisters, their glowing eyes shining in the dark like warning signals. "On the ground," a soldier barked, but the sisters did not move. "We will not kneel," one whispered, her voice cold and sharp. The other stepped forward, her hands trembling but her stance firm. "We will not be taken." The soldiers tightened their grips, their weapons humming, the room filled with the smell of heated metal, ready to fire. Daniel's heart pounded. He saw the moment hanging in the air. One wrong move and blood would stain the snow. He pushed forward, shouting, "Stop! Listen to me!" His voice cracked but carried enough force to make them pause. "These girls saved my life," Daniel said, pointing at the sisters. "They protected me from something not of this world. They are not the threat. The real threat is out there." His words cut through the storm of orders and noise. The soldiers hesitated, glancing at each other, unsure. The officer in charge stepped forward, his face hard as stone. "You expect us to believe that?" he asked, his voice low and filled with suspicion. "Men saw lights in the sky, heard the noise, and found this house half destroyed. And you're protecting them?" Daniel held his ground. "Yes, because without them I'd be dead already." The officer's eyes narrowed, then shifted to the sisters. "What are you?" he demanded. The sisters looked at each other, then one said quietly, "We are survivors." The other added, "We are guests who were let inside, and now we belong here." Her words sent a strange chill through the room. Even the soldiers seemed unsettled, their fingers twitching on their triggers. The officer stared for a long moment, then spoke again. "If you belong here, prove it. Submit to us. Come with us. Let us decide what you are." Daniel's stomach turned. He saw the trap in those words. If the sisters went with them, they would never return. The government would lock them away, study them, maybe destroy them. It was not safety. It was a cage. The sisters stood silent, their glowing eyes fixed on Daniel. It was not spoken, but the meaning was clear. They were asking him to choose. Would he let them be taken, or would he protect them, no matter the cost? The officer saw the hesitation and pressed harder. "You have one chance, man," he said, his voice sharp. "Step aside and let us take them, or be charged with aiding something unnatural." Daniel's mind spun. He looked at the soldiers, at their weapons, at the smoke still rising from his broken home. He looked at the sisters, their faces pale but steady, their bond unbroken, and then he made his choice. He stepped in front of the sisters, his voice firm. "No," he said. "They stay with me." The officer's jaw tightened. The soldiers raised their rifles again, but before another word could be spoken, the night outside roared. A sound split the air, deep and metallic. The snow lit up with strange lights, brighter than the trucks, brighter than the rifles. The soldiers froze, their eyes wide. Daniel turned to the sisters, who whispered together, their voices filled with dread. "They have come again," one said. "This is not the end. This is only the bargain," the other added. The roof shook, the windows rattled, the air itself vibrated with power, and everyone in the room, soldier, man, and alien, realized the choice was already too late. The air was alive with noise, engines roared, weapons hummed, and from above came the deep metallic thunder of something not human. The soldiers froze where they stood, their rifles aimed but their hands shaking. Daniel stood in front of the sisters, his body tense, his heart hammering. The officer barked orders, shouting for his men to hold their ground. But no one moved, because the sky itself was glowing. Through the storm, strange lights broke the darkness, red and silver beams cutting across the clouds. The sound of machinery echoed, sharp and unnatural. The sisters clutched each other's hands, their tattoos burning bright again. Daniel turned to them, whispering harshly, "Tell me what's happening. Tell me now." One of the sisters looked at him, her eyes wide with sorrow. "They are calling for us. They want to end us before the bond is complete." Daniel shook his head, confused and desperate. "Bond, bond, you keep saying that. What does it mean?" The second sister stepped closer, her glowing face inches from his. "It means we cannot survive without it. It means we were made to join, to connect, and now the choice must be made." The words cut into Daniel like blades. He looked from the sisters to the soldiers, from the glowing sky to his ruined home. He felt trapped between two worlds, both demanding, both dangerous. The officer shouted again, "Step away from them, Daniel, or you'll be treated as one of them." Daniel's throat tightened. He saw the fear in the soldiers' eyes, but also their hatred. He saw the sisters trembling, but also their strength. And then the sky tore open. A massive shadow descended, larger than any machine Daniel had ever seen. Its surface shimmered like liquid metal, shifting shapes as it moved. The ground shook, snow rising in clouds as the ship hovered above the street. The soldiers panicked, aiming their rifles upward, shouting. The sisters dropped to their knees, their hands pressed to the floorboards. Their glowing marks spread brighter, veins of light running across their arms. Daniel felt the pull inside him again, stronger than ever. It dragged at his chest, at his mind, as if the world itself wanted to tie him to them. "They will take us," one sister whispered. "If we do not bond, they will destroy us," the other added. Daniel clenched his fists. "And if I bond?" Both looked at him together, their voices uniting. "Then you are no longer alone, and neither are we." The officer snapped. "Don't listen to them. They're using you. They'll hollow you out and wear you like skin." The soldiers shouted agreement, fear twisting into anger. Daniel's mind spun, his breath sharp in his throat. Could he trust the sisters, or were they only binding him to his doom? The ship above released a beam of silver light. It swept across the street, over the houses, over the soldiers, over the broken home. Anything it touched trembled and cracked, as if being torn apart from within. Men screamed, dropping their weapons, clutching their heads. The sisters rose suddenly, their hands stretched toward Daniel. "Choose us now," one cried, her voice desperate, "or everything ends." the other whispered, tears burning in her glowing eyes. Daniel felt the pull become unbearable, like chains dragging him forward. He stepped back, shaking his head. I can't. I don't understand. But deep inside, he knew he already understood. It was not about logic, not about reason. It was about trust and about surrender. The officer lunged forward, grabbing Daniel's arm. Don't do it, he roared. They're not human. They'll destroy you. Daniel looked into the officer's eyes, but all he saw was fear. When he looked into the sister's eyes, he saw something else. Need, hope, and something he could not name. The ground split as the ship roared again, the beam widening. Soldiers scattered, some firing into the sky, their shots useless. The sisters fell to their knees once more, their voices rising in that alien song. The tattoos across their skin pulsed like fire, and Daniel felt his own heartbeat sync with theirs. It was happening, whether he wanted it or not. The bond was forming, but it needed his choice to complete. He stood frozen, the storm howling around him, the world tearing apart, and in the chaos, a single thought came clear. If he walked away, the sisters would die, and maybe the world with them. If he accepted, he might lose himself, but he might also save everything. The sisters reached out one last time, their glowing hands trembling. Please, Daniel, they whispered together, become one with us. Daniel closed his eyes, his heart hammering. The choice was his, and his alone. And with the ship above roaring, the soldiers screaming, and the sisters pleading, he finally stepped forward. The ground shook beneath Daniel's feet. The massive ship hovered above the street, its silver light tearing through the night. Soldiers scattered like ants, their rifles useless against the power that hummed in the sky. Windows shattered, roofs cracked, and the snow itself seemed to burn under the beam. Daniel stood frozen, the sisters on either side of him. Their glowing hands reached for him, their tattoos burning brighter with every second. The pull in his chest had become unbearable, like his heart was no longer his own. Their voices rose together, a desperate harmony. Choose us, Daniel, or the world will fall. The officer shouted from behind, his voice breaking through the storm. Don't do it. They'll consume you. They'll hollow you out. But Daniel could barely hear him. The roar of the ship and the song of the sisters drowned everything else. The beam of light widened, swallowing trucks, trees, even whole pieces of the street. The soldiers screamed as their weapons turned to dust in their hands. The officer fell to his knees, clutching his head, his face twisted in terror. Above it all, the sisters' voices grew louder, stronger, uniting with the thunder of the ship. Daniel's body trembled, torn between fear and surrender. If he stepped forward, he would no longer be himself. If he stepped back, the sisters would be taken, and earth might fall. His breath came ragged, his heart racing faster than it ever had before. Then, the sisters turned to him fully, their glowing eyes locked on his. Bond with us, one whispered, her voice breaking. Or everything ends, the other cried, her hands trembling. Daniel closed his eyes and stepped into their arms. The moment their skin touched his, the world exploded in light. It was not pain, not exactly, but it was fire, it was storm, it was everything. His mind stretched beyond itself, pulled into theirs. He felt their memories pour into him. A broken planet, burning skies, cities turned to ash. He saw their past, their training, their creation. They had been made not only to serve, but to bond. Their survival depended on merging with a human, becoming something new, something greater. And now, that human was him. Daniel gasped as their thoughts pressed into his. He felt their fear, their sorrow, their hope, and in return, he felt himself sinking into them, his own memories flashing, childhood, family, loneliness, nights spent in silence. Together, the three minds became one. The pull vanished, replaced by a unity so deep it made breathing feel different. The tattoos on the sisters' skin spread across Daniel's arms, glowing as if alive. The ship above roared louder, but Daniel no longer trembled. He raised his hand, and light poured from his palm. The beam from the ship faltered, its power bending. The soldiers stared in shock, their mouths open. The officer shouted, "What are you?" Daniel's voice was no longer his alone. It carried the strength of three, deep and echoing. "We are bonded," he said, "and we will not be taken." The ship shuddered in the sky, its light flickering. Daniel and the sisters lifted their joined hands, and a surge of energy exploded outward. The beam shattered like glass, scattering into 1,000 sparks. The street lit up brighter than day, then fell into sudden darkness. The soldiers stumbled back, their rifles useless, their faces pale. The officer stared at Daniel, his voice shaking. You're not human anymore." Daniel looked down at his glowing arms, then at the sisters, who now stood taller, their strength renewed. "No," he admitted, his voice calm, "but I am not your enemy." The ship above groaned, its surface cracking. Pieces of silver metal fell like rain, melting into the snow. Then, with a final roar, it pulled upward, disappearing into the stormy clouds. Silence fell, broken only by the soft whimper of frightened men. Daniel stood in the ruins of his street, his body still glowing faintly. The sisters beside him breathed slowly, their eyes locked on him with trust and something deeper. For the first time, he did not feel the pull. He felt whole. The officer stumbled forward, his voice weak. "This isn't over. The world will never accept you. They'll hunt you, all of you." Daniel looked at him, his glowing eyes steady. "Then let them come," he said quietly. "We are ready," the sisters whispered, their voices blending with his. Snow began to fall again, soft and endless, covering the broken street. The soldiers retreated in silence, dragging their trucks away from the ruins. Only Daniel, the sisters, and the shadows of the storm remained, and in that silence, a truth settled deep in Daniel's heart. He was no longer alone. The bond was complete. But far above, beyond the clouds, other ships waited, watching. The war was not over. It had only just begun.